Hi guys, it's me ChazzaHDF1 and welcome to this live podcast where me and Nib today are going to finally review the 2019 Formula 1 season, look at all the teams and drivers and also look at how great the races have been this season, the championship tables, and just look at everything that has happened in 2019. Hopefully you guys are doing well after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix of course ended 2 days ago, and hopefully today you're all ready to finally review this season and give your thoughts on all the teams and all the drivers, and we will do that in this stream. We should be going tonight for about, I don't know, an hour to an hour and 15 minutes probably. And don't forget guys, we will be coming to you guys in the chat plenty of times. Once we finish the top teams and talk about them, we'll come to you guys for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then once we finish the midfield, we'll come to you guys again to get your thoughts on them as well. So don't worry, we'll be interacting with you guys plenty in the chat tonight. But now I'll bring on Nib for today's podcast. And Nib, how you doing, mate? And are you finally looking forward to reviewing this season?
I'm doing well, thank you very much. And yeah, I'm looking forward to review this season, to put it back in the past and what could have been a very good season for a championship battle, which just ultimately didn't eventuate.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get onto that later on the championship tables and how the championship basically was over after about 8 or 9 races. But let's first get into the top team, the world champions of 2019, and that is, of course, Mercedes. Now, for Mercedes, the team, they have had probably one of, if not the best season of their entire, existence, in my opinion, because this season they did have quite a lot of times, big competition from Ferrari and Red Bull, but still this season were able to win, I think, 15 or 16 of the 21 races. Very dominant, again, despite the gap between them and Ferrari and Red Bull not being as big as it was in the pre-2017 era, 2014, 15 and 16. So the team Mercedes, great, car they've produced, great team they have been this season. And again, they absolutely dominated this season. In the second half of the season, it was definitely a lot more difficult. But in the first 8 races, there was no real hope of beating this team. There was no hope because they were just so consistent. They were always there to pick up the pieces when other teams and drivers made mistakes. And that's why, at the end of the day, Mercedes basically ended the championship battle after about 7 or 8 races. And congratulations to them on winning the Constructors' Championship for Lewis Hamilton. Again, another great season for him. I don't think this season has been his best in Formula 1. I think 2018 was probably him at his best. But this season still, he has been great. Very consistent. Still very, very quick. And when in certain races he's been kind of challenged to be at his best, such as the Hungarian Grand Prix, or even a race like Canada, even though he won because of the penalty, he's been able to produce his best pace this season. And he is definitely the worthy champion of 2019. Very, very consistent. And that's why, really, he won the championship, because of his consistency. And for Valtteri Bottas in the second seat at Mercedes, I think Valtteri has had a very good season. I think Valtteri this season has probably had his best season in Formula 1. He's had, 4 race victories, I believe, this season. He's been very consistent, been on the podium so many times, been in the top 3 in qualifying so many times. Yes, the car has been very good, but still, he has had his best season in Formula 1 and has, and it's nice to see, proved the doubters wrong, because this time last year, nobody realistically thought Valtteri was going to be in the Mercedes for 2020, and he had to prove a point, and he did with a great 2019. There's been a couple races where he wasn't, quite at it, but most of this season, he has been doing what's required of him, and he's been doing the best he can in that car. But this team in 2019 has been quite unstoppable, and going into 2020 as well, they are looking like the clear favourites and are looking, again, near unstoppable for 2020 as well. Nib, for the Mercedes team, how great have they been this season? And for the drivers, what have you thought of their performances?
Well, yeah, Mercedes have been Mercedes, really. Once again, so dominant. They quite clearly had the best car in the corners. They might have been lacking a little bit with the engine, but still, it's super reliable. Still quite a good engine, and yeah, they were absolutely dominant. They barely make any mistakes. They don't make mistakes in their pit stops. Sometimes the strategy had been a little bit poor, but you can't make every single strategy call spot on. I still think that they're probably the second. I think they're probably the best or second best run team in the sport in terms of running their strategy and their pit stops. I'd say them and Red Bull are definitely the benchmarks in terms of running a team or just with their pit stops. The drivers, Hamilton, proving once again that he doesn't need to be anywhere near his best, if I'm completely honest with you. Just was comfortable. He gets pole, and then, half the times he didn't even actually get pole, and he won the races. I think that's how good Hamilton was this year. That you could see how good his racecraft is. And that's one criticism, of course, that Vettel gets, that his racecraft isn't the best. Or Hamilton certainly has it in leaps and bounds. He has it in absolute bucket loads, is what I should be saying. He's leap and bounds ahead of the rest of the grid in terms of the best driver, certainly over the season. And with Valtteri, he had a very strong start to the season. Of course, he won 2 of the first 4 races. He won it in Melbourne and at Baku. And we thought, here we go, porridge version 2.0 Bottas. But of course, he kind of fell away during the mid-season part, and Hamilton went on a run where he won how many Grand Prix in a row? 4 races in a row from Spain to France. And that was when he really extended his championship lead, and that's when it was kind of over already, probably by the French Grand Prix. But, Bottas, I agree with you. He's probably had his best season in the sport so far, but I still think there is room for improvement from Bottas. And I think that we could perhaps see that in 2020. But as you said, also, I don't think anyone expected him to still be in this Mercedes seat, but he did so well at the start of the season, out-qualified Hamilton quite a lot in the early stages of the season, and secured his seat for next season. So absolutely, big congrats to Valtteri Bottas on that.
Absolutely. And another thing Valtteri did very well that was a massive criticism of him in 2017 and 18 is his second half of the season was actually pretty good. If you look at Spa and Monza, I thought he was basically right there with Hamilton in terms of performance. And then at Suzuka, of course, he out-qualified and out-raced Hamilton. Great victory that was at Suzuka, where he dominated the Grand Prix. US Grand Prix as well, out-qualified and out-raced Hamilton. So, and then, the last race in Abu Dhabi, he came from the 20th to finish in P4. And if the DRS had been working for the race how it should have been, then Valtteri probably would have finished in 3rd place, because that's how good his pace was in the Grand Prix. But yeah, Valtteri, great season. And I think as well, to touch on what you said about Lewis Hamilton, it is true that when, he hasn't had the best qualifying, and this season as well, in qualifying, he hasn't actually been anywhere near his best in qualifying compared to other seasons, because he has made some mistakes in certain races. But in the races, he's then made up for it with some great overtakes, making the overtake at the right time at the start. And yeah, Hamilton's racecraft definitely this season has been very good. And this team, going into 2020, are without a doubt, and Lewis Hamilton is, for the Drivers' Championship, the favourites for 2020. I think Red Bull and Ferrari, in terms of performance, they should be closer at the start of next season. But it's very hard to see this man in this team not winning the 2020 World Championship. But let's now move on to a team who we thought would be very competitive this season after testing, but at the end of the day, simply were not good enough. And that is, of course, Ferrari. Well, what an absolute disaster this season has been. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into my thoughts about Ferrari, because I do have a 2-part review of their season coming up at the end of this week and also at the start of next week. So I'm not going to get too deep into my thoughts about Ferrari, because I'm going to kind of save it for then. But I don't think anyone can doubt this season has been very, very poor for the team. I don't think any Ferrari fan out there can even try and, make out this season has been anything good. Because coming into the season, we thought Ferrari had a car that was right there with Mercedes, if not faster. And simply, it was not good enough, this car. It was aerodynamically poor. It was inefficient aerodynamically. And the team as we know from this season that we've just finished, is horribly run. It's a horribly managed racing team, and I'd have to say, if you took the money and resources away from Ferrari and gave everyone the same budget and resources this season, I don't think Ferrari are even top 5 in the constructors. That's how poor they've been this season. And really, this season, the only reason they've been in a position to win a couple races is because of their engine. If they didn't have the strong engine that they, have, I don't think Ferrari would have won anything this season. I mean, yeah, in Singapore, they did improve a lot, but still, we know that when it comes to qualifying, where they got the pole position there, that their qualifying engine mode is so good that it can put them in positions that even they don't deserve to be in, even though they're at a track that they're not good at. So, yeah, Ferrari this season have been absolutely terrible, and for next season, they're not looking good at all. But Nib, I'm going to leave the majority of the thoughts on Ferrari to you. So for Ferrari, what have you thought of their season? And for Vettel and Leclerc, what do you think of their seasons as well? But yeah, for Ferrari, it's just not the season we thought it would be, is it, after testing?
Yeah, well, of course, you'll recall the 3/10 gap that Ferrari had to Mercedes after and going into the first race of the season. And, Ferrari were absolutely nowhere in Australia, not even on the podium. They were absolutely miles off in the race. Let's see how far they were off in the first race. Sebastian Vettel and Charles Leclerc were a minute off the lead at the end of the Australian Grand Prix, and that was quite a shock to the system. Now, everyone sort of blamed it and thought that it was, to do with this issue that they had with bringing a very stiff suspension, and that they struggled around the bumps of Australia, which, of course, we then seen in Bahrain, where they were very quick and where they should have won the Grand Prix with Charles Leclerc, but then, of course, he had an engine issue. But Ferrari were just really poor. They in the corners, they really, really struggled. They, especially up until probably, where would it be? Probably Belgium. They struggled with chronic understeer in the corners. They just had no grip in the car. They went for a very low drag car, which of course made them an absolute rocket in a straight line, which we've seen throughout the season. But in these cars where they are quite high downforce, what wins you races is by having more downforce on, and that's what Ferrari lacked. And we could see that, especially in Abu Dhabi in the last sector, and in Brazil in the middle sector, that was what they were lacking. They're just lacking downforce, and for 2020, that is certainly what Ferrari will be looking for, is for more downforce, because if they can keep this car and the engine in that good of a nick, Ferrari will be able to challenge Mercedes at least with on race pace or just in general pace of the car. But one thing, of course, that they need to work on is their strategy, because Inaki Rueda, although he did make a couple of good calls throughout the season, was, of course, generally awful, as per usually, as he has been over the last couple of seasons. And ultimately, Ferrari just stabbed himself in the own foot at the end of the day. That's what they do. They put themselves in good positions, but then they just make mistakes with the strategy over and over and over and over again. The drivers, I think there is a little bit of tension growing between Vettel and Leclerc. Of course, at the start of the season, Matteo Binotto, who I still think can be a very good team principal at Ferrari. I think that some of the things that he said have been questionable, like them favouring Vettel from the start, when I think clearly Leclerc has been the better driver throughout the season. And I think we're seeing that Leclerc, for his debut season in Ferrari, what a season he had. Of course, he won 2 races in a row in Belgium and Italy. And then I think we're all surprised that he didn't. He should have won in Singapore, but Vettel jumped him in the pit stops, and then they didn't swap him around, which was understandable. But yeah, Leclerc, I think, has definitely outshone Vettel this season, if I'm perfectly honest with you. It took Leclerc a couple of races to get used to that Ferrari, but after he did, he was very, very good indeed. And for Sebastian Vettel, a below-average season. Of course, he started to pick it up from about the Singapore Grand Prix, but that's too late to start picking it up, and it was just ultimately a little bit too late. But if we can see that sort of Sebastian that we did from about Singapore onwards, I think that we could see a better fight between those two Ferrari drivers next season. And it'll be interesting to see if the Ferrari drivers are allowed to fight, especially after, of course, what happened in Brazil. when they crashed. Of course, that's never good when teammates crash into each other. And I think that for 2020, we'll have to certainly keep an eye on with Vettel and Leclerc to see if there's any tension growing and whether or not that forces one of the drivers out of the team or not.
Absolutely. I did actually see, though, this morning an article that apparently Ferrari have said that the two drivers are free to race next season. I don't know if that'll actually happen. It does depend on, what certain situations are, whether they're racing for the lead and Ferrari need a race win desperately. We'll have to see. But I think definitely this driver lineup will definitely be very tense next season. But for the team, yeah, just very poor, and they've really, compared to 2018, except for probably straight line speed, they've gone backwards in every area. And that's why this season has been just nothing good for this team. But anyway, we'll move on from Ferrari. I just want to say, though, before I get onto Red Bull, I will again be making a two-part review of Ferrari's 2019. The first part will be coming out probably on Friday. That's not a guarantee, but I'm going to try and aim for it to come out on Friday, the first part. And then the second part will come out hopefully on Monday, next Monday. So I will give my full detailed analysis of Ferrari's 2019, and it should be quite hilarious. But yeah, that'll be coming up very, very soon. But now, let's get into the final top team, and that is, of course, Red Bull with Honda, who have had a good first season together. I think definitely better than we thought it would be. The first 8 races was definitely not as good as what Red Bull were hoping for, though, because their car just wasn't aerodynamically doing as well as they were, say at the end of 2018, and they just were missing quite a bit of downforce compared to, say, Mercedes, even though the power difference between Mercedes and Honda actually was not that big at all during the course of 2019. So Red Bull in the first 8 races did okay compared to Ferrari and Mercedes, but after Austria, where they brought a new front wing, their season was completely transformed, where Max Verstappen, of course, took their first win in Austria, then they won in Hockenheim, and again, really from the Austrian Grand Prix on, except for a couple races here and there, Spa and Monza, where they weren't that quick, but that was to be expected. They were very quick, and probably in terms of race pace, the second quickest team in Formula 1 from the Austrian Grand Prix on. And I think if you look at, again, the course of the season, Red Bull will be happy with this season because it's probably gone a bit better than they were expecting, even though I think Helmut Marko was expecting the team to win about 4 or 5 races. But let's get on to the drivers, the 3 drivers that drove for Red Bull this season. First off, Max Verstappen. Again, I won't get too deep into my thoughts about Max Verstappen because I am going to do a video on him as well coming up soon. But clearly, he has had a very good season. He's got the best out of the Red Bull car. And his race victories this season have been quite brilliant. And if Red Bull and Honda at the start of next season can produce a car that is definitely a lot more similar to to Mercedes and Ferrari, how it was around Austria. If they can produce that type of car at the start of the season, then I think Red Bull with Max Verstappen can compete for the World Championship, even though it will be tough against Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton. But Max Verstappen definitely has had a very good 2019, and I can't really fault him that many times for this season. But then we have the number 2 drivers for this season, Pierre Gasly first off, who we'll get onto later with Toro Rosso, but in the first half of the season, simply Pierre Gasly was not good enough. He was not anywhere near Max Verstappen in terms of pace, and he had to be dropped. Yes, he has done well at Toro Rosso, and yes, the Red Bull car is clearly designed more so towards Max Verstappen, but you can't be a second a lap off your teammate in a race or a qualifying session. You cannot be that bad, and that's why Gasly had to go, because he's way too slow. And Alex Albon, who of course replaced him for the second half of the season, I think he's done all right. I don't think he's done great. He has had some good races. Spa was definitely a very good race. Suzuka, I thought he did pretty well. Mexico, I thought he did pretty well, but there is still definitely room for improvement from Alex Albon. But I think once, we get into the winter break and into testing, and Albon can get some confidence going with his new team, once he has, a full winter break to get to know them even more, that I think Albon next season should hopefully be a bit closer to Verstappen in lap time, and he should be looking good in certain races next season. But yeah, Albon definitely did better than Gasly in the second half of the season compared to Gasly in the first half. And I think, even though Daniel Kvyat, I think, was probably the better driver out of the three for the entire of 2019, I think if you compare Albon versus Gasly and who deserves the Red Bull seat out of those two, you'd have to say, based on how they've both done, Alex Albon did do the better out of the two. But for Red Bull, good season. If they had a proper driver alongside Max Verstappen, a Carlos Sainz type driver, then I think Red Bull honestly could have got P2 in the Constructors, but it wasn't to be. But yeah, Red Bull, good season. And I think next season, definitely dark horses for the World Championship if them and Honda continue to improve and Verstappen maintains his great level nib. For Red Bull, what do you think of their season? And yeah, for Verstappen, what do you think of his season, how great it was? And as well, what do you think of the two number 2 drivers at Red Bull?
Yeah, right. So first of all, as you pretty much have said already, the first 8 races of the season before they brought a front wing upgrade at Austria, Red Bull were off the pace. Their car wasn't working. They were struggling with rear end stability in the corners, and as soon as they brought that front wing upgrade, the car was able to. The car just connected. It was able to do what Max Verstappen certainly wanted, and as you could see, it ultimately worked out pretty well in Austria. And I think, that was massive because, of course, that performance by Verstappen at Austria was absolutely spectacular. After he had that awful start, dropped back to 7th or something, and then came all the way through to beat Charles Leclerc in that Grand Prix. So, yeah, that was certainly the turning point of Red Bull's season. And then, of course, in the Great Britain race, they're a little bit disappointing. But then in Germany, Max put in a fantastic performance to win that Grand Prix. In Hungary, of course, Red Bull were very strong again. Didn't win the race that time, but were very close. And, of course, in Brazil, Verstappen won again. But, yeah, Red Bull, they've always been a team that started off slowly. And we're seeing it again this season. And as you said, they really do need to get it going from the start of the season next time. And yeah, let's see what happens with Red Bull there. But yeah, with Max Verstappen, he's going from strength to strength as an F1 driver. He's going to be sixth season in the sport next year, which is absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, I think Verstappen will just become even better next season. I hope that he gets a car which is capable of winning races at every single racetrack, because I cannot get enough of this Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen battle that we've seen on numerous times throughout the season at Hungary, at the US Grand Prix, and then of course at when was it? At Brazil, of course, where they had some great battles as well. But I think moving on to now Pierre Gasly, I think the moment that we all realised where Gasly was just quite simply not good enough to be in that Red Bull team was Austria, because after the first lap, Gasly was ahead of Verstappen, and then he ended up a lap down from Verstappen, who ended up winning the race, of course. So I think that really showed that Gasly just was not up to the level of Red Bull. And as soon as he's gone to the Toro Rosso, which we'll speak about later, he's certainly improved. And now with Albon in the Red Bull, I think he's performed really well, especially that Grand Prix in Spa, where I think he went on the grass to overtake Perez to get P5. I think it was at the time. That was a fantastic move by Albon, and to go from P20 to P5 on your first race in that car, extremely impressive. Of course, he should have had a podium at Brazil, but it was taken away by him after the contact with Hamilton. And yeah, I think that Albon, he's done a lot better than Gasly, that's for sure. I still think that he can improve, but I still think that Albon has done a very, very solid job. Sometimes he's been right there with Verstappen. I think was it in Japan that they had the identical lap time, and when did we ever see Pierre Gasly get close to Max Verstappen in qualifying? We didn't. So I think that shows that Albon really has potential to be a good number 2 driver at Red Bull, and I think that we'll see that develop through 2020.
Yeah, it was Suzuka where Albon set the same lap time, and in the race, I'm just trying to remember what Albon. I think Albon had a bad start and then to come back through the field, and he did pretty well, I think, to finish in P4. But yeah, Albon definitely has had the better time at Red Bull compared to Pierre Gasly. But guys, before we get into the midfield, we are now going to come to you guys in the chat for about 10 minutes and see what you guys have to say about the top teams in 2019 and the drivers. So make sure to put your thoughts in the chat, and we'll make sure to read it out and comment on it in just a moment. Just want to say, though, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, as we'll have plenty of season review content coming up for the rest of this month, and then season preview stuff coming in January as well. So don't forget to subscribe for that. Bottom right of the screen, you can do it right there. Or you go to our homepage, do it there, hit the notifications bell as well. And as well, smash a like button for more content like this. But let's now get to you guys in the chat and see what you guys have to say when it comes to the teams and drivers. So let's see some comments here. Femi CEO, Valtteri best season F1, but still second by a mile. True, but as I've said during this season, Valtteri Bottas does not have to beat Lewis Hamilton. Valtteri is not viewed at the team, or he shouldn't be viewed at all by anyone as an equal to Lewis Hamilton. What Valtteri Bottas is what Rubens Barrichello was to Michael Schumacher. A number 2 driver who, at certain races, will push the number 1 driver very hard, but most of the time, the number 1 driver will come out on top. That's what Valtteri is, and I think Valtteri this season has done very well. And again, if you view him as a number 2 driver, which he should be viewed as, then he's had a very good season. Let's get to some Ferrari comments. Reza says, worst year for Seb? No, I wouldn't say it's the worst year for Seb. I think it's been worse. Alan says, Ferrari self-destruct. Mr. Younggun says, I love Seb, but Ferrari needs to move on to support Charles. I said that in my Leclerc versus Vettel in 2019 video, which if you haven't seen, make sure to check out, where I analyse who was the better driver this season. Yeah, I said in that video, and I'll say it again, Leclerc is Ferrari's future. So I think Ferrari at this point need to start coming up with a plan of, you know, who is going to be Leclerc's teammate, say, past 2021, because it's probably not going to be Sebastian Vettel. Ferrari is their own worst enemy, says Tonka. Alan says that double stack in Abu Dhabi was too funny. The funniest part of it is it was kind of, if you could argue that it was them trying to replicate what Mercedes did in China, where Mercedes banged out, what, 2 3-second pit stops, and Ferrari did what? One was 3 seconds and the other one was about 6.5. So, yeah. And actually, if you look on reflection, even though I'll get onto this more in my review of Ferrari's season, the strategy in Abu Dhabi was very poor, because they brought in Charles Leclerc way too early. So I don't understand why they brought Leclerc in. That pit stop should have been for Sebastian Vettel, and if it was, then Vettel wouldn't have lost 4 or 5 seconds in the pits. But Leclerc, I don't understand why he was brought in so early. He should have gone another 10 laps, and if he did, he may have held on to second place. But, of course, he didn't, because Max was able to put in some very good laps after Leclerc pitted, and then, of course, had the fresher tyres and passed him later on. But why Ferrari pitted him at the same time as Vettel when Vettel was on a lot more worn tyres, I do not understand at all. Clearly, that team has no idea what they're actually doing. But, let's find some other comments here if I can. Yeah, Seki Hybrid saying as well, Ferrari tried what Mercedes did in China and obviously failed. Hello to Mostly an F1 fan. Brooksfoot, Gasly seems much happier in Toro Rosso, whether that is the tech crew he has supporting him there or a pressure expectation thing. I think it's more pressure for Gasly because it came out basically that after testing where he crashed the car quite heavily twice, he got some, I guess, unwanted or unneeded pressure from people back at the Red Bull team, you know, higher up in the Red Bull team as well, And that put pressure on Gasly to start with. And then because the car wasn't that good at the start of the season, that didn't exactly help. And then it just unraveled. So if Gasly does get another chance at Red Bull, he knows exactly what not to do next time. And that's not crash a car badly in testing and get rid of parts that the team needs for the first few races. Right, let's find some others here if I can. Seki Hybrid Mercedes was scary this year, still performing so well without getting updates after Germany. Japan were 2020 prototype parts. Yeah, basically. I think that's the biggest omen going into next season, is that Mercedes didn't really update their car that much after the summer break. And I think that's pretty clear that they're now trying to get ahead on 2020. I think Red Bull also kind of doing the same. I think Red Bull could have brought a lot more upgrades to the final few races if they wanted to, but they're, trying to concentrate on 2020 more because they know if they produce a good enough car at the start of the season, then they're probably going to compete for the World Championship, because Red Bull tend to develop the best out of any team in the Formula One, because at the start of the season, this season, they ended up being clearly third fastest, and at the end of this season, they're clearly the second fastest team. So, there you go. Let's find 2 or 3 more comments, and then we'll get on to the midfield. Mostly an F1 fan says, Ferrari showed signs of genuinely getting the most out of their quicker car, especially Spa, Monza, Singapore. But overall, they've retained their mistakes from 2017 and 2018, sadly. This is the thing with Ferrari going into 2020 and beyond, is because of how mistake prone or error prone they are, they need a car that's so quick that it will make up for how incompetent they are as a team. That's the only way Ferrari can really win certain races or even compete for a championship, is having a car that is so quick it will make up for the incompetence of some of their decisions and the incompetence of their own team as a whole. So, yeah, Ferrari, just a complete joke, to be honest. Mr. Random Guy, with 2018 Seb do better against Leclerc than 2019 Seb? I don't think there's really a difference, to be honest, between 2018 and 2019 Seb. Still the same strengths and weaknesses. And the 2018 Seb had a better car under him than he had for 2019, so I don't think there's really a difference, to be honest. And we'll find a couple more comments if I can. Mostly an F1 fan again. Ferrari are lacking in every area but quali pace, strategies, reliability, pit stops, getting involved in incidents, investigations, team management on and off the track. I hope Seb can turn it around though. That's the thing with Ferrari, and this is why I say for next season they're not in a position at all to compete for the World Championship, is because there's too many problems that they're not going to fix in 2 months. They're not going to fix them, especially if they do not get rid of the people that are the main causes, such as Anaki Rueda. If you don't remove the problem, then you're not going to have a solution to that problem. You know what I mean? You're not going to fix the problem if you don't get rid of it. And that's what Ferrari are not going to do. They have got rid of a couple people to do with the aerodynamic side, but not people who carry more weight in the team, such as Anaki Rueda, who controls when Ferrari, of course, pit and don't pit. Right, one final one, and then we'll get to the midfield. Midfield that's been very competitive this season. Probably the most competitive midfield battle since 2012, to be honest. Alan Gial says, oh yeah, I forgot Gasly got lapped twice in the season by Verstappen. I think those 2 races, the Austrian and Hungarian Grand Prix, were probably the races that definitely got him sacked from Red Bull, because as Nib said, in Austria, Gasly was ahead of Verstappen on the first lap, and then by the end of the race, he was a lap down. And then in Hungary, Red Bull were on pole with Max Verstappen. Gasly was P6, a second off pole. And then Gasly again was lapped by his teammate Max Verstappen, who was competing for the race victory, when Gasly really should have been, considering how slow Ferrari were, Gasly really should have been in third place, but he wasn't. So those were really the two races that got Gasly the sack. But I think now we'll get on to the midfield and start off with the team who finished P4 in the Constructors, McLaren, who've had probably their best season in Formula 1 since 2012, to be honest, because this season they've actually looked very good as a racing team at the track. Of course, the car can still be much quicker to be regularly getting podiums or race victories, but McLaren, very good season, especially compared to 2018. And if you actually look back at 2018, it's quite surprising that this team has been so good this season, because this time last year, McLaren were a complete disaster. We thought McLaren were heading nowhere for a couple years. And we thought 2019, McLaren would probably be better than 2018, but not that much better, and they would be okay at best. We didn't really think this season would be that good, but it's turned out that McLaren have had a great season. We'll say, though, not all parts of it were great for McLaren. The first 6 or 7 races, McLaren were good, but they weren't great. They definitely weren't as great as they were from the French Grand Prix on, where that's really where their season just took off for them in terms of getting P4 in the Constructors' Championship. But yeah, in the first 6 or 7 races, there were certain races where McLaren were very quick, but then there were other races where McLaren just weren't quick at all, such as the Chinese Grand Prix, the Spanish Grand Prix, but they just really didn't have the pace in those certain races. But again, once we got to the race at Paul Ricard, where they completely dominated the midfield battle in terms of speed and out-qualified Sebastian Vettel and Pierre Gasly in the Ferrari and Red Bull respectively, and were almost out-qualifying Max Verstappen in qualifying at that race. Again, that is where their season took off, because then in Austria, Silverstone, Hungary, they dominated the midfield, and even into the latter races of the season, they were clearly finishing at the front of the midfield pack. And I think that basically from the French Grand Prix on, they basically were the highest scoring midfield team at every Grand Prix, and that's why McLaren were able to just continue comfortably in 4th in the Constructors. And I think consistency of them scoring those points is what really did help them get that position. But for the drivers, let's get on to them. Carlos Sainz, what a season for Carlos Sainz, finally showing in a proper team in the midfield what he can do in Formula 1. Great season. Some of the races he's had has been fantastic. We need to just try and, if we can, pick out a few. So, of course, Brazil coming from the back to P3. Hungary finishing in P5. Suzuka, I think he finished in P5 as well, beating Charles Leclerc, even though Leclerc was in a much faster car. I know Leclerc had to pit early on, but still beating Leclerc was still very impressive. And he only finished Carlos Sainz a few seconds behind Alex Albon in the Red Bull. And just, yeah, this season, he was always at the front of the midfield. And even in races where the McLaren car was not that good, he was still doing well, such as Monaco, where he performed an absolutely stellar overtake around the outside on the first lap up to Casino Square. Great move. And yeah, Carlos Sainz this season has been one of the top 3 or 4 best drivers this season, without a doubt. And if McLaren continue to improve and get closer to being a top 4 or 5, in the race type team, then Carlos Sainz could be getting more podiums very, very soon. For Lando Norris, though, Lando, he's had good races this season, but I don't think Lando has been as good as people want to make out. There has been races where Lando was really off the pace, such as Monaco, where he didn't have any pace at all. In Spain also, I remember he didn't have any pace. But again, there has been races and qualifying sessions where Lando has been very quick. He also has been unlucky on a couple of occasions, such as Spa, where he was running in a very good P5. But compared to teammate Sainz, definitely nowhere near as good. But as a rookie season in Formula 1, I think he's done good. I wouldn't say very good or great, but I thought he's done good. Definitely could do better, though, because, again, in certain races, certain weekends, I don't think he was quite at it, but it is his first season in Formula 1. I think we have to remember that. Carlos Sainz's teammate is in this season, it was his 5th season in Formula 1. So it was always going to be very tough for Lando to beat Carlos Sainz this season, because Carlos is a very good driver. But for Lando, again, good season, not as good as many out there want to make out, but a good first step for Lando in 2019, and hopefully in 2020 he can get closer to teammate Carlos Sainz, and I think he will, because he will learn from certain mistakes in 2019. Nib, for McLaren, what season they've had, and also their two drivers, what a partnership they are.
Yeah, indeed. McLaren have been super, super impressive in 2019. As you mentioned, they didn't exactly have the greatest start to the season, but I still think that they were trying to understand their car from pre-season testing. And once they understood their car, certainly once they got to the French Grand Prix, boy oh boy, what a car they did have in the end. Comfortably was the best team in the midfield, consistent every single weekend, top of the midfield. I think the only really sub-average race that they had after probably France was the Italian Grand Prix, where Renault were super, super quick that weekend. But you know, we'll move on to Carlos Sainz, because I've praised McLaren quite a lot already so far this season. I've said that Zach Brown, James Key, Andres Seidel, that is a great three people to have at their team. And once again, I'll say credit to Zach Brown. He's really got that team in a good place everywhere. So yeah, once again, credit to Zach Brown. But we'll move on to the drivers quickly. Carlos Sainz, what a season he's had. I think really showing the potential that he did have. I think everyone knew that he was a good driver. He didn't exactly show it in the Renault. I thought that he performed pretty well in the Toro Rosso, but obviously Max took a lot of the plaudits there, and deservedly so. But Carlos with a breakout year for him, and he really shown that he's good in qualifying, even though in the end Norris beat him in the qualifying battle 11-10. But I feel as if having Lando Norris as his teammate has really pushed him, because I know, this young bright rookie who had a pretty solid season in F2. Coming into the team, there was some pressure on Sainz. Also replacing Fernando Alonso, and Sainz really lived up to what he could perform, and he was really, really good this year. And Lando Norris, of course, his rookie season in the sport, and I do think he had a really good season. I think there was many, many times where he was very unfortunate, where he just got caught up in first lap instances. But I think Lando has really come on leaps and bounds as a driver so far this season. Early on this season, self-admittedly, he was a little bit cautious and just wanted to get to the end of the race. I remember in Australia, he was stuck behind a car. I think it was Giovinazzi who had damage from lap one. He was just stuck behind Giovinazzi a lot. He didn't want to risk it and go for an overtake. He just wanted to play it safe. But by the end of the season, and by halfway through the season even, he was really aggressive, making those good overtakes, which we've seen him make in F2. And he has come on leaps and bounds as a driver, and I think Lando Norris will only get better in that McLaren as the years go on. And I really am excited for McLaren with those two drivers, because they're just going to push each other. They get along fantastically, and I think that those two can really push McLaren back up to the top of the sport.
Absolutely, and I think as long as McLaren just keep improving, get closing the gap to the top team, which is probably going to be Mercedes, and of course they inherit Mercedes power for 2021. As long as they keep closing the gap, then that is great for them, because we're not expecting McLaren in 2 years' time to be winning races. But as you said, they've got two very good drivers, and they look as though now they've got a proper team going at McLaren. That's something they didn't have a couple years ago. But now we'll get into the other Renault power team, the Renault Works team, Renault. So, Renault this season have been very bad, very, very bad compared to where we thought they would be. Now, again, I'm not going to get super deep into my thoughts about Renault, because I am going to make a video about Renault as well, reviewing their season, because I think it's been a lot more... it's been worse, Renault's season, than people, I think, actually think. But this season for Renault simply has not been good enough. They've been very, I think, inconsistent is the word, because there has actually been races where Renault have had good pace, And I'm not just talking about Canada and Italy and races like that, but there's been races where, again, they've had good pace, but not got the result they should have. One race that comes to mind for that is Singapore, where they were just as quick as McLaren, but ended up, I think, only scoring 2 points when they really should have been scoring about 6 or 7 from that Grand Prix. That just sums up Renault's season. Having a car that in principle is good, but when it comes to actually getting the result, they rarely got it. When they did get it, they got it big time in Canada and Monza. But yeah, this season for Renault, not good enough. And if 2020 is not an improvement, I don't really see what the future for this team is past 2021, because they should be, by 2020, comfortably P4 in the Constructors. Comfortably P4. But after this season, if things continue in the same vein of form into 2020, then I don't see how they're going to beat McLaren, because McLaren have... I'm not sure about the better driver lineup, because Daniel Ricciardo, I think, is the best driver out of the 4. Ricciardo, Ocon, Sainz, Norris. But Sainz and Norris are probably going to be a better partnership in terms of scoring points at races and going to be more consistent than Ricciardo and Ocon. But yeah, Renault, they've got to get it right in 2020. If they don't, I just don't see where this team goes. And I think their drivers will probably start to look elsewhere for seats. And I wouldn't be surprised if another company bought the Enstone team, because I'm not sure Renault after 2021, where they'll be, the only engine they'll be supplying is to themselves. I'm not sure their commitment will be that strong anymore, to be honest, towards Formula One. For Daniel Ricciardo this season, it's not been his best season, but I think he has still been very good. There's been races where, again, the Renault has not really been that great, and he's still been able to produce great pace and have a great performance. The US Grand Prix is a great example of that, where McLaren probably had the quicker car, but he was able to finish up in 6th place. Canada as well, qualifying in P4, I think it was. What a weekend that was for him. Italy as well, where he was qualifying in 5th and finishing in 4th. Yeah, this season, Ricciardo, I think most of the time he has done very well and done the best he can. Been certain races where he could have done better, but again, most of the time he's done very well. Nico Hülkenberg, of course, is now out of Formula One and probably never coming back. I think Hülkenberg, in the first half of the season, I thought he did all right. I thought he did, compared to Ricciardo, I thought he did, well enough to be in the Renault car for 2020. And to be honest, I still think Ricciardo and Hülkenberg should be the lineup at Renault for 2020, because I don't really see what the problem was with the lineup. I mean, did they drive at their absolute best ability all the time? No, but I thought they did pretty well with what they were given. And I think it would have been nice for Renault to have that continuity going into next season, so they know if the car is actually better going into next season compared to this season. But of course, Hülkenberg's out of Formula One. And Hülkenberg also, in the second half of the season, really did drop off. And I think that's because he knew that his Formula One career was basically over. But yeah, the drivers, I thought they did mostly the best they could with what they were given, and what they were given was simply not good enough. Nib, for Renault, coming into this season, we thought Renault would be basically in McLaren's position, but it's just been a very underwhelming season, hasn't it?
Yeah, super underwhelming season for Renault. I think that we could see that it was kind of a mess right from the off, whenever they had the issue with the rear wing in the DRS in Barcelona testing, when, of course, the rear wing, the DRS flapper come off the car, which was not good at all, of course. And yeah, it's that kind of set the tune for what their season was. It was very messy. I think that they had the potential in the car to be in McLaren's sort of position, but I think that they just struggled. They brought some upgrades at the French Grand Prix. They didn't work, and I think since then that they just really struggled. You can see that they're just the front and the rear of the car weren't connected in the corners, and it was no surprise that at tracks where there was a little bit more, where the straight line speed was a bit more important, that they did very well, like Monza and Canada. That's where they performed their best, on tracks which were high speed tracks with lots of straight lines. So yeah, but I think less said about Renault the better, to be honest, because I think in 2020 it's a super crucial season because, of course, in 2021 they want to be back on the podium, and well, if you look at it at the moment, they're a long way from that. But a lot can change in a year in Formula One, and that might be different for Renault. But yeah, we'll now move on to Nico Hülkenberg and Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel Ricciardo had a pretty solid season. Certainly, of course, I agree with you. He didn't have his best whatsoever, but still put in some really good drives, as you mentioned, in Canada and Monza and some other races. But I think that we've seen Ricciardo make more mistakes than he usually does, and I think that he struggled to get used to not being able to brake super late like he could in the Red Bull. Like in the Red Bull, he would brake super late, get the move done, but in the Renault, he wasn't able to do that. You've seen him locking up a little bit more, and of course, he produced that comedy gold moment when he reversed into Danny Kvyat, I think it was, in Baku. That was quite interesting by Ricciardo. But yeah, certainly not Ricciardo's best season, but he was still better than Nico Hülkenberg. And I remember after the first 3 races, everyone's like, "Oh my god, Hülkenberg's better than Ricciardo." And then yeah, Ricciardo just showed how much better he was than Hülkenberg. But I feel as if Hülkenberg did have a pretty good season, if I'm perfectly honest. Unfortunate that he's not in the sport next season. I still think he deserves to be in the sport, but sometimes the sport just moves on, and Hülkenberg's time in the sport has passed. As you said, he didn't perform as well in the second half of the season, but the majority of the races he wasn't too far off Ricciardo, but he was never beating Ricciardo, and I think that even going into the season, that I think Renault were already looking to get rid of Nico Hülkenberg. Cyril Beatball's like, we'll be looking to get rid of him, if he doesn't perform. So yeah, I think that Hülkenberg was always under pressure from the start of the season, and a Beatball and Prost perhaps just didn't like what they seen from him. So yeah, I think that was probably why Hülkenberg was gone. And of course now with Esteban Ocon coming into the team, that would be nice. That will be interesting to see. Good to see Ocon back in the sport because he does deserve a spot in the grid. And it sounds like we say that every driver in the world deserves a spot in the F1, but I think that's a real testament to how much the talent of the drivers have improved. Because you look back in 2010 or 2012. There was a lot of drivers on the grid who just weren't good enough for Formula One, but they had a seat on the grid, and that has certainly improved throughout the years. And yeah, I think that will wrap it up for Renault.
Yeah, as you said, the quality of the grid at the moment is probably the best it's been in, I'd say, 10 years, I'd say. But yeah, the quality of the grid, as you said, very, very good. And it is nice to see Esteban back on the grid. And I think next season for Esteban is basically his do-or-die season, because if Daniel Ricciardo comfortably beats him, I don't see Esteban ever getting a chance at a top team, because they will want to see how he does against Daniel Ricciardo, a driver who is a very good driver to compare against, because Ricciardo has beaten Sebastian Vettel in a season. He was very close to Max Verstappen in their time, so if Ocon does beat Ricciardo in 2019, or 2020, sorry, then I think that would be, making his career going forward. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he does. But, yeah, Renault this season, nowhere near good enough, and it has to improve next season. But now, get onto a team who I think deserve to beat them in the Constructors' World Championship, and that is Toro Rosso. What a season for them. 2 podium finishes. Who honestly believed that Toro Rosso were going to get on the podium twice? We came into the season thinking Toro Rosso would be just kind of a meh kind of team where they'll get some points here and there, but they'll most of the time not really be there. We weren't really sure about their driver lineup and just how the car was going to perform. But this season has probably been their best season in Formula One since 2008, when they, of course, won a Grand Prix. Very good year, and it's been great to see this team be at a level where they can be consistently fighting for points and be in the points. And it is a shame, honestly, that Toro Rosso don't get the P5 in the Constructors, because, again, I think they deserve it. They have a lot less resources and money compared to the Renault Works team, and ended up about 6 points behind. And Toro Rosso this season, I thought, were just better than Renault, especially trackside. I thought Toro Rosso were a lot better at getting results out of the car that maybe were not expected or they didn't exactly deserve on pace. So, yeah, Toro Rosso, it's a shame they didn't get P5 of the constructors, but P6 is still very, very good. For the 3 drivers they had, let's get into them. So, Albon, the first half of the season, I thought he did good, but again, nothing special. I didn't think he was very good or great, but he did good for the first 12 races he was at Toro Rosso. There were some very good races he had. China, Monaco was also very good for him, but most of the time he was not doing, again, great, but he was doing all right. He was decent in the first half of the season, I guess you could say. Silverstone also was a very good race for him as well, but I thought most of the races for Albon were okay. Daniel Kvyat, his teammate for the first 12 races, I still think out of him, Albon, Gasly, he has had the overall best 2019. And I think Daniel still does deserve that seat at Red Bull, but that's just the way it is. And yeah, Daniel, great season, great return to Formula One. Coming into this season, I thought Daniel would do better than people were expecting, but I didn't think it would be this good. You know, getting a podium finish and being in the points so many times as he was. And there's been some races where Daniel has not got the credit he should have got because of, you know, certain other drivers having great races or whatever. Monaco finishing in P7. At Spa, he came from near the back of the grid to finish in, I think, P7 or P8. One race he was very good in was the Italian Grand Prix, where he started outside the top 10, did an overcut, jumped loads of cars, got up to P6, and then his engine failed. That's probably the Grand Prix where Toro Rosso lost P5 in the Constructors, because if they did, with Kvyat finished there or got after the Renaults and beat them in that race, then who knows what would have happened in the Constructors. But yeah, Daniel, great season. That drive at Hockenheim was great. He started quite low down. He got up into the top 10, and then once it came to the moment to switch to dries, he got it right, got up in there in the top 3 and 4, passed Lance Stroll when it mattered most, and then held on brilliantly for the podium. So great season for Daniel Kvyat. Second half of the season could have been better, but there were still some good races. His race he just had in Abu Dhabi was very good, where he went very long on the hard compound, and then at the end of the race was able to come through and get P9. So yeah, great season for Daniel Kvyat, and does deserve absolutely to be on the Formula 1 grid. And then Pierre Gasly, who of course came in the second half of the season. Gasly, I thought at the start of his Toro Rosso, I guess, re-debut, the first 2 races, I thought, yeah, wasn't that great. But, you know, in Singapore, I think that was really a turning point for him as well this season. Because in Singapore, I think he qualified in the top 10, or he's probably just outside of it, and then finished up very nicely in, I think, 8th place. And then in Suzuka as well, that was also quite a big turning point, because that weekend, you know, the pressure of racing at the Engine Supplies home race, he really did produce when it mattered. Getting into the top 10 in qualifying, and then in the race, he raced very well into a points finish, even though he was took out at the end by Sergio Perez. But the checkered flag was waved, I think, a lap too early, so he held on in the end. But I think Suzuka was probably the turning point of his season. Singapore was a turning point as well, but Suzuka was definitely the turning point in Gasly's season, because after that, he was great. Mexico, he was very quick, just like his teammate Kvyat. At the US Grand Prix, very quick that weekend, but was unlucky with the suspension failure. And then, of course, at the Brazilian Grand Prix, qualified and was racing at the front of the midfield. And then with all the chaos that happened, he managed to get a podium. Did he deserve the podium? Maybe not, but you have to be there to capitalise. And that's a trait of, very good or great drivers, is being there to capitalise when drivers make mistakes or, have certain problems. So great end of season for Gasly, and hopefully in 2020 he can produce that form again, and hopefully the Toro Rosso car is next season, still as good as it was at the end of this season, because if they can start the season off well next season, maybe they can go for P5 of the Constructors again. We'll see. But Nib, for this Toro Rosso team, what a season they've had. And I think honestly, because of how great it was, they might be quite disappointed that they didn't get P5 in the constructors. What do you think?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, when you get 2 podiums and you still are not able to secure P5 in the constructors, I think ultimately that is a little bit disappointing, I should say. But I don't think they can be too disappointed whatsoever with the season that they've had. Was season 2 podiums? I don't think anyone would have expected that going into the season. Of course, with Kvyat in Hockenheim, and then of course Gasly in Brazil. But I think I'm going to start with Pierre Gasly here, if I'm honest, because I think Gasly is more fresher on my mind than say Albon or Kvyat in the first half of the season at least. But well, I think what am I saying now? I do think that Pierre Gasly has been really, really good in the second half of the season. He's been driving like a driver that that you'd say, oh, get him in the Red Bull seat. Brundle said that a lot, and I agree with Brundle on that point. If I'm completely honest, he's been really, really good. We did the podcast during the summer break, and I said that this could be a very crucial point for Kvyat, and he could kick on, and we could see what happened to Kvyat happen to Gasly, but Gasly has not let that happen. And credit to him, he's stayed strong, and he's pushed through it and battled, and heaved, and he's ended up the season with a podium. And full credit to Pierre Gasly, I really do commend him for that. He's fought really, really hard, and he's had a superb second half of the season, in my opinion, after what was an absolutely shambolic first half of the season, if I'm perfectly honest with you. Danny Kvyat, I thought that he had the better first half of the season compared to Alexander Albon, if I'm perfectly honest. But of course, Helmut Marko, not the biggest fan of Danny Kvyat, and Albon's the younger driver. Let's put the other driver in the team, and Albon has done very well since then in the Red Bull team. Danny Kvyat, I thought there was probably more deserving of the seat, but that's just how it is at the end of the day. Albon, of course, in his first in the first half of the season, I thought was showing more signs of him being a rookie than say Russell or Norris. He was making mistakes, he was crashing quite a bit. I remember he crashed in Australia. Of course, he crashed very heavily at the final corner in China, but he's really gone leaps and bounds since the first half of the season. He's really, really improved. But yeah, I think that Toro Rosso have had a really good season, and I think they should be very proud of what they've accomplished this season. Maybe slightly disappointed that that they didn't get P5 in the constructors, but at the end of the day, there wasn't too much they could have done. They just didn't have a good enough car for the majority of the season like Renault did. Even though they picked up the 2 podiums and Renault didn't pick up a podium at all. So, yeah, a very good season for Toro Rosso, and hopefully that's something that they can build on with what looks to be a very promising Honda engine, which I didn't mention earlier about when we're talking about Red Bull.
Yeah, absolutely. And Honda this season, we can get onto now, very good season. I mean, they ended last season very good, ahead of Renault, I think, in terms of power. I think this season hasn't always looked great for Honda compared to Renault. But if you compare them to Mercedes, for example, Honda do have a lot of power compared to what they had, say, a year and a half ago in terms of the comparison to the other engine suppliers. So Honda, yeah, great season. The race in Brazil especially was amazing. How Gasly held on against Hamilton up the hill. And also for Max Verstappen, it was pulling a lot of power for him as well. But yeah, Honda, great season. And I think if Honda keep improving and, keep making these, not massive steps, but, noticeable enough steps with the power unit, then you should see Red Bull and Toro Rosso just continue to improve going into 2020 and beyond as well. But after Toro Rosso, in the constructors, it is Racing Point, who I think have had a pretty good season if you look at the circumstances of this season. So the first 4 races, Racing Point were really good in terms of the results they got. The pace of the car was not that great, but the results they got were very good. Lance Stroll getting P9 in Australia, Perez getting P10. in Bahrain. Perez had a great race in China where he could have finished at the front of the midfield ahead of Daniel Ricciardo if the Racing Point was just a bit quicker. And then Perez finished in 6th place in Baku. So great start to the season, but then at the Spanish Grand Prix, because of lack of development and money and resources compared to other teams, Racing Point fell backwards, and between Spain and the German Grand Prix at Hockenheim, they only had 1 points finish, which was Lance Stroll in Canada. And that's really where Racing Point lost any opportunity of fighting for the top 5 in the Constructors. And I will say again, if they had maintained during that, that period between the Spanish Grand Prix and German Grand Prix, if they maintained a good enough car in the midfield like they had after the German Grand Prix, then I think they would have ended up finishing P5 in the Constructors, because they were very good in the races this season, but they just didn't, some of the time, have a quick enough car to go and get the result that maybe they deserved to get with the hard work they were putting in. But yeah, Racing Point, I think, again, considering the circumstances, very good season. Both drivers, I think, have done well. Sergio Perez has been quite an unsung hero, I think, this season. P10 in the Drivers' Championship. Again, in a car that's been quite underdeveloped this season, and he's had some very good races. Again, Baku, very good race. China was a great race for him. The Italian Grand Prix as well, where he held off Max Verstappen. The Belgian Grand Prix, where he almost held off Albon and got 6th place in that Grand Prix. And then, as well, Russia, he had a good race. And where else did he have a good race? The last race in Abu Dhabi as well, great race. And Mexico as well. So, again, if you look at the car that Racing Point have had this season, you look at the situation of that team, Sergio Perez has had a very good season, and I think does deserve a lot of praise for this season. And Lance Stroll, I think, does deserve some praise. Now, you guys may know that I am not the biggest fan of Lance Stroll, but this season, I have seen something that I wasn't sure he would show by this time in his career, and he is really showing real big improvement. And now I can really see from Lance Stroll that, where he needs to improve to become a good or a very good driver in Formula One. If you look at the races, Lance Stroll is a very good driver. He's great at the starts. He's very good at managing tyres. And also, his consistency over a race distance is very, very good. There is no doubt about that. And I don't think anyone out there can doubt that. The biggest problem, as we know, is qualifying. If he gets qualifying more so right, or he brings his qualifying a lot closer to his race performances, Lance Stroll could be, say, a similar-ish driver to, say, a Sergio Perez in terms of consistency of finishing the points. But because Lance Stroll so many times this season has had a poor qualifying, he's been unable to get into the points because, again, he started too far back. But for Lance Stroll, I think we can now really see that he can be a good driver in Formula One, no doubt about it, but he just needs to make those improvements to his qualifying. And if he does, then next season might be a massive season for him. And as you can see on the screen right now, this is P4 at Hockenheim. Again, if he gets the qualifying right, he has the abilities at the start and in the races in terms of the consistency and managing tyres to be able to be a consistent point scorer. So hopefully he can improve that. And hopefully the Racing Point car improves as well, so he can, be even further up the grid. Because again, in the races, he's a very, very strong driver. And for Racing Point, considering the circumstances of the lack of development that we've seen this season, I'd have to say good season. Would you say the same?
Well, I think I'm going to start off with just your finishing comments there. I honestly thought you were joking. I honestly thought you were being sarcastic when you were speaking about Lance Stroll.
No.
I never thought I would hear you speak positively about Lance Stroll. Chazza, congratulations. I'm shocked. Chat, we should give a round of applause to Chaz for actually praising Lance Stroll. I think a little bit of a round of applause. But I told you this. I've been saying that he actually is a pretty good driver. But it's just his qualifying, and he always has good starts, which puts him in a better position But if he actually had a good qualifying and along with those starts, he'd be a very good midfield driver. I said that so many times throughout the season, and now it's good to see that you agree. So I think one thing that really has helped is him working with Juan Pablo Montoya. I've certainly noticed that him in the race has been a lot better this season. But I think that as I moved away from I think that he really has improved throughout the season. And I think that working with Juan Pablo Montoya has really been beneficial for him. So I'm happy for Lance because I certainly haven't seen him get as much criticism this year. But during the off season, if he just really needs to work on his 1 lap pace, because if he can just start to string those laps together, then him and Perez could be a very good driver partnership. And of course, his seat in that team is going to be secure because, of course, his dad runs the team. I think that Lance Stroll has massive potential to be, well, I wouldn't say massive, but potential to be a very good midfield driver. And yeah, now once I finish my my thoughts on Stroll, we'll move on to Racing Point. But yeah, they didn't have their actual proper car up until Australia. So in Australia, it was actually very impressive that they scored points with Perez. And then, of course, after China, where Perez was super good and finished only behind Ricciardo, as you mentioned, it fell off. And I think it showed that the whole B spec car idea is kind of flawed. And if they can actually bring upgrades more consistently to races instead of just bringing a whole new car, which is going to act completely different for the drivers, that I think that they can perform better in 2020. But now that they've got money and more resources, hopefully that they are able to do that instead of just having to put all of their upgrades into one big package, which they brought progressively through Spa and Hockenheim. So yeah, I think that Racing Point really could improve next season, and I think that they've always done a good job with the lack of resources and lack of money that they've had, but now with more funding and more resources, I expect them to do better in 2020 now that they've sort of got a good flow of money going into that team now. But we'll move on to Sergio Perez, of course, because we didn't talk about Perez. We started off with Stroll. Perez, well, what can we say about Sergio Perez? He just has another fantastic season in the car that certainly wasn't the greatest all the time. Where they end up finishing in the championship, end up finishing in 10th, only 2 points behind Daniel Ricciardo, and finished ahead of Lando Norris as well in the championship. So, Perez, he really is one of the best drivers in the midfield. He shows it all the time, and he got what was a 3-year contract?
Yeah.
A 3-year contract during the middle of the season. So his agent has done a fantastic job there, and he deserves to be on the grid for a long time, to Sergio Perez, because I think he will always be one of the mainstays in the midfield. So I think Perez had a very good season, and I think that he can, if he has a bit of a better car, I think that he could put in performances like, say, Carlos Sainz did in the McLaren this year. I really do think that Sergio Perez is that type of level of a driver. So yeah, I hope that Sergio Perez can show us more of what he really has in 2020 in that Racing Point.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if he does get the car, I think Perez, if you look at this season, he's been very consistently getting probably the best he can out of the car. As you said, if he can be given a car that is maybe not like it was in 2017, but say more like it was in 2018, where it can fight in the points on a regular basis, then Sergio Perez, I think, will have another great season next season. And if Racing Point do turn up at the start of next season with a car that is similar to, say, how it was at the end of this season, and as Nib said, they don't just bring a B-spec car halfway through the season and forget any upgrades before then Racing Point, I think, are a dark horse for 2020 to finish in the top 5. Because, again, this season, if you look at it, if they had brought upgrades between the Spanish and German Grand Prix, they would probably have beaten Renault and Toro Rosso because they were very, very good once they got a chance to finish in the points. But now we'll go on to the team that finished behind Racing Point, which is Alfa Romeo, who It's a season that really could have been for Alfa. They had a very quick car this season at certain races, but they were way too inconsistent. And I think that is kind of for a couple reasons, which I'll get onto in a moment. But yeah, pace of the car was very good. In the first 4 races, they had a car that was probably top 5 out of all the teams on the grid. Kimi Räikkönen had some very good races at the start of the season. Bahrain, I remember, he finished in P7. Antonio Giovinazzi did have quite a poor start to the season, but he did improve from basically the Canadian Grand Prix on. But yeah, Alfa, first 4 races, pretty good, but it could have been better for them in terms of results with the pace of the car they had. Baku is a great example of that. They qualified 8th and 9th, but started at the back with both cars. But then from the Spanish Grand Prix on, they dropped off because of not really lack of upgrades. It was more upgrades not working for them. But then they brought another set of upgrades to the French Grand Prix and they improved again. And that is probably, from the French Grand Prix to the Singapore Grand Prix, probably the best period of the Alfa Romeo season. Because in France, Räikkönen finished in P7. He also finished in the points Räikkönen at Silverstone. At Hockenheim, they did get a double points finish, but got disqualified because they were basically using traction control at the start. And then in Hungary, Räikkönen was very quick, and I think he even thought he could have beat Carlos Sainz in the McLaren to P5 in that race, but they just got a bit unlucky in that race with strategy. And then Spa and Monza, that is really the 2 races I think that sum up their season, because they had a very quick car, but scored such little points for what they deserved in return. At Spa, if both drivers' car worked properly and both drivers, were at their best at those in that race, then I think they could have easily dominated the midfield battle in that weekend in that race. And then the Italian Grand Prix, again, quick car, but they just didn't produce, the pace when it mattered or get the results when it mattered. Singapore, of course, Antonio Giovinazzi led the Grand Prix for a few laps, which was mental. But again, the Italian and Belgian Grand Prix just sums up their season. Quick car, but just not getting the results. Very inconsistent this team is. And then from, of course, Russia on, they weren't really that quick at all. They got P4 and P5 in Brazil, and their pace that weekend was very good. Mostly because of the Ferrari power unit down the long straights. But yeah, Alfa could have done a lot more this season. I'm not sure they would have got top 5 in the Constructors, but they definitely could have done better than P8 in the Constructors, which I don't really think they deserve for the pace of the car they had. But you have to say, just way too inconsistent. For Kimi Räikkönen, good season for Räikkönen. Without him, I don't think Alfa would have beat Haas in the Constructors, for example. But yeah, Alfa, good season. Kimi Räikkönen, good season. Most of the time in the points, getting the best out of the car. And when he did actually have a car that was compliant with what he wanted, Kimi was one of the best drivers in the midfield. And I remember me and Nib saying at the mid-season break that Kimi was one of the top 3 or 4 best drivers of the season so far. So just shows you how great Kimi was in the first half of the season. Second half of the season, he didn't drive as well, but again, didn't have a car that was compliant with what he needed in the second half of the season. Antonio Giovinazzi, though, another driver who I've criticised and doubted a lot, I have to say, I think he's had a good season. First 6 races, not good enough. I thought Baku was pretty good, but the other races in those first 6 were just not good enough at all. I think in Monaco as well, he was beaten by one of, if not both, of the Williamses. That's how poor he was there. But once we got to Canada, if you look at the qualifying performance, comparing Antonio to Kimi Räikkönen, again, he was very good. The only thing he has to work on is his consistency in the races. Basically, the opposite is Lance Stroll. Antonio, in qualifying, is very good. And I think if you give him a car that, can do wonders in the midfield, and I think at least in qualifying, he can get some very good positions. But again, he just doesn't yet have that consistency in the races that a driver like a Sergio Perez or Lance Stroll has at Racing Point that we just talked about. So if Antonio can improve in that area, then I think Antonio could be a very good Formula 1 driver. But Yeah, Antonio, good season. And I think definitely more to come from him in Formula One. But for Alfa, again, what could have been, really what could have been, they had a quick car, but they just didn't have a team there that could get the best out of it in 2019. And Nib, for Alfa Romeo, do you think it could have been a much better season given the pace of the car?
Yeah, well, if you look at where they were at the end of the mid-season break, I think they were fifth or sixth in the championship.
Yeah.
No, probably. Yeah, they were in a really strong position in championships. Obviously, I don't have everything in front of me, but they were in a really good position. But in the second half of the season, they were really, really bad. They were always like say 15th, 16th, 14th in the races. I remember one of the races they were slower than Haas even, and Giovinazzi was battling with the Williams. Like that was how bad the car was in the second half of the season. First half of the season, Alfa Romeo was really, really strong. So if they can improve that in the if they can improve say upgrades next season to the car, that I think that they then could have a really good 2020. Kimi Räikkönen was really, really good this season. Showing that Kimi really still is one of the best, or one of the better drivers in the sport. If I'm perfectly honest, well, maybe not in the sport, but he still could be in the Ferrari. Is basically what I'm saying. But of course, Leclerc absolutely deserves his seat in that car, in that team, I should say. But yeah, Alfa Romeo, pretty average season. They could have done. I think they could have done a lot better. If, as I said, if second half of the season they just fell away massively. And Giovinazzi, I really think he had a pretty solid season. Considering it's his first time really in a single seater since F2 in 2016. I think he did a really, really good job actually, and I expect more things to come from him next season. I think he'll go from strength to strength. In qualifying, of course, fantastic. And as you mentioned, he's sort of similar to Lance Stroll. He just needs to improve his race performances because in the race, he's really poor generally, if I'm perfectly honest. But of course, in some of the races, he's very good. So I think that Antonio just needs to work on that. And I think that if he doesn't perform next season, that he could be under a little bit of pressure from that team, perhaps for Robert Schwartzman or another young Ferrari driver to come into that team. Of course, or Mick Schumacher, but that remains to be seen how Mick Schumacher performs in F2 next year. I expect more from, say, Robert Schwartzman and other drivers in the young Ferrari driver program, but who knows? Who knows? But yeah, I think that's it for Alfa. A season which really could have been them finishing sixth or fifth in the constructors, but it just fell away from them in the end of the season. In the second half of the season, they were poor, and yeah, I think that will be where they'll be looking to improve in 2020.
Yep, absolutely. And as you were saying with Ferrari young drivers, Robert Schwartzman is probably the number one Ferrari driver at the moment not in terms of skill or pace, but in terms of the one who's looking the most promising, I think, going forward. I think definitely look out for him more so than Mick Schumacher or Marcus Armstrong as well. But now, let's get into the final midfield team. And that is Haas F1. And we're not going to spend too long on Haas because it's been that bad of a season. The only races this season they've been good is Australia, Barcelona, Hockenheim, and Russia. Other than that, they've been very poor. Their race pace is diabolical. They have no tire wear, it's almost like they have no understanding of the tires at all. They couldn't get it heated up at certain times, and when they did, they ended up falling away from them. And we saw plenty of times this season where they would have not a great qualifying, but a good or an all right qualifying, but then by lap 10 they're dropping down the field one by one, and to the point where they end up being racing maybe even the Williamses we've seen a couple times this season. I remember Mexico, they were racing them. Austria even, where Grosjean said that the car felt like it was on wet tyres, or it felt like the track was wet. That's how bad the grip was of the car. So, yeah, Haas, awful season. For the two drivers, Kevin Magnussen, I actually think, has had a pretty good season. But the problem is, he's had nothing to work with. He's had absolutely nothing to work with. In Australia, he was great, even though his teammate got unlucky with the loose wheel nut. I thought K-Mag in Australia was great. In Bahrain, he was great. He qualified in 6th place, but again, the car is poor. China, he was pretty good. And then Spain, he finished up in P7, put a great move on Grosjean, who, they made contact on the safety car restart there. I remember Monaco as well, where he got 6th place with front wing damage in qualifying. I think people forget that. 6th place in qualifying, and a bit of his front wing was broken. So, yeah, I think K-Mag has actually had a very good season, but because his car's been so bad, he hasn't had enough time to really show how great of a season he's had. Also, was it 5th place in Austria, I think, in qualifying? So again, great season for Magnussen in terms of driving, but the car has been so poor that it's made his results look a lot worse than, or made his, say, driving ability this season look a lot worse than it's actually been. Look at Abu Dhabi as well, where he went from, 14th on the grid, went round the outside of a couple cars at turn 4 and was really looking great and very racy in that car. But again, the car on race day is so poor that there's nothing K-Mag can really do about it. Romain Grosjean this season he's had 3 or 4 races where I think Romain has done pretty well, but there's been too many races this season. Most of the time, Romain has simply not been good enough, and I think Romain Grosjean does deserve to not be on the grid anymore because he's had enough time, I think, to get it right, and I think Haas really should have gone for a driver like Nico Hülkenberg, but they didn't, and they got Grosjean and Magnussen for next season. But yeah, Magnussen definitely has been better than Grosjean this season. There's no doubt about that. And for K-Mag, hopefully, he has a car that is actually good enough for him to be right up there next season because, again, he's driven very well this season, just hasn't had the car to show how good he can be. Nib for Haas, what a terrible season. It's been basically a joke, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been super, super awful for Haas. We know what we said at the end of 2018, what Haas need to improve, and that was their tyre management and just their general understanding of the tyres. And they didn't. They probably went backwards. I think they were probably worse on their tyres than what they were in 2018, in all honesty. And I think the fact that the Australian spec car was the car that they ended up using at the end of the season tells you everything you need to know about the season Haas had. Haas were just absolutely diabolical all season long. Their upgrades just put them backwards, and that's never a good sign, especially with a team that has as little resources as Haas does. You want your upgrades to be effective as possible, certain, and just use the sort of do what what's it called, like what Racing Point or Force India back in the day would do. They didn't have much resources at all, and they were still getting fantastic results, and that's what Haas need to certainly try to do. They just need to try to make those upgrades a lot better than what they have been. And yeah, with their drivers, I don't know why Romain Grosjean is still in the sport. I think Danny Kvyat, even though it probably was Kvyat's fault, the incident in qualifying, he just goes on the radio and whinges. Like I remember one time in France, he complained about Ricciardo, and Ricciardo's like, I didn't even know. And I think that sums up Grosjean. He just complains on the radio. Gunter Steiner even jokes about haha, give me ideas how Romain can improve because I have no idea. But and then he still keeps him in the team. I don't understand why Grosjean's still in the sport. You can just go write some more cookbooks with your wife. His wife seems quite lovely. But Kevin Magnussen, I think he's quite clearly the better driver in that team. He's had a really good season, and I think with the car that is a lot better. I think that he can do really well. We've seen at times last season that when he had a better car, especially Australia before all the issues, that he can be a really good driver. That move that he did on Verstappen, of course, at turn 1, but I really do think that Magnussen can be one of the best drivers in the midfield. I think that he has that ability, but he's just unable to show it in the car that he's given by that Haas team, and they certainly need to improve for 2020. Otherwise, they'll be battling with Williams all the time.
Yeah, that could happen. That honestly could happen. But we're now at the end of the midfield. If you're wondering if we're going to talk about Williams, no, we're not going to talk about Williams because they don't deserve to be talked about. They've been absolutely horrible. And yeah, I hope they improve next season. But yeah, we're not really going to talk about them because they've been absolutely piss poor. But anyway.
Giga Kubica!
Who, of course, beat Russell in the Drivers' Championship, which we'll get into in a moment, which I cannot believe actually happened. But before we get into the Driver Championship and Constructors Championship tables, I just want to ask you, Nib, for this season, best driver, best race of the season in terms of entertainment, and as well, what would you rate the season out of 10 as?
Oh, that is a good question. Best driver, I think you have to give best driver to Lewis Hamilton. He was just dominant all season long without even being anywhere best, in my opinion. And I think we've seen that in qualifying. I think that's what I mean mainly, is in qualifying, you'd expect him to be on pole a lot more than what he was this season. But he didn't even need to be on pole, and he still come back through the field and won. He just showed how good he was. But the driver of the season in Formula 1.5, definitely Carlos Sainz. I think that's who else. Those are probably the two contenders for driver of the season: Sainz and Verstappen and Hamilton are probably the best top three drivers of the season. I think I'd say. What was race of the season? 100,000% Hockenheim. That was absolutely the best race, and we certainly had a lot of fun commentating that for you guys. And I think that I might have enjoyed Brazil even more if we were able to be on live, but Brazil was another great race as well. And for rating of the season, I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10, if I'm perfectly honest. I think it would be pushing a 9 if we had a battle towards the end for a championship. It was a year with great races, but just without that championship battle. And, I think that in 2020, I think that if we can get a championship battle and have races as bonkers as what we did, say in Austria, Hockenheim, Silverstone, Hungary was even fantastic. Brazil was fantastic. If we can have more races like that and a championship battle, I think we're going to have a really special season, and hopefully we can have a special season next year.
Absolutely. For me, top three of the drivers of the season, I'm not going to say who my best of the season is because I'm going to make a video about it, but definitely the top three is, as you said, Hamilton, Verstappen, Sainz. Not necessarily for me in that order, but again, I'll get into that later on. Carlos Sainz, I'd say third. And then Verstappen and Hamilton, I'm still undecided about because I think Max has been super good this season as well. Race of the season, it has to be Hockenheim. It has to be. That race was mental. I remember we were barely halfway into the race and so much had happened. And we still had another, 33, 34 laps left. And the final half of the race as well was absolutely unbelievable. And as you said, Hungary, Silverstone, Brazil, great races. Monza as well. I thought, honestly, Monza was a classic Grand Prix. That fight for the win between the two Mercedes and Charles Leclerc. Bahrain was mental. What other races out there? Spa was pretty good, even though, of course, it was tinged with a bit of sadness. Suzuka was very good. But yeah, this season has been, I think, a good season. I'd agree with you, 8 out of 10. The only things missing, I think, are the championship battle. But also, I think one thing that we need to mention is that we've had great races this season, but when we've had a race that's not so good, it's been really not so good. That's been probably the biggest problem, is that the races that haven't been one of, let's say the worst races this season have not been good at all in any shape or form. At least in, say, 2012 or 2013, the races that weren't so good were still, in comparison to other seasons, still good races. But this season, the absolute worst races have been really, really bad races. So that's probably why I'd not give it a 9 or 9.5 or anything like that. But guys, let us know for the midfield what your thoughts of those teams are and drivers. And also for the season, what would you rate the season out of 10 for? Who is your driver of the season? Top 3 if you want to mention that as well. And what is your best race of the season? Let me know right now in the live chat, and then we'll get to you guys in a moment, but I want to first have a look to see what you guys have to say about the midfield. So let me scroll up quite a bit.
But just before you get there, of course, because you're going to have to do a little bit of scrolling up. I think that the tracks which, of course, produced the worst races of the season were, no surprise, Russia, France, and Abu Dhabi, because they're the worst three tracks on the grid for racing, and that's why they were the worst races of the season.
Yeah, it's not a surprise, is it? We knew that would be the case. Yeah, France definitely was the worst. I don't think anyone can even debate that. That race was god awful. Right, let's find some comments here about the midfield. So, Seki Hybrid Racing Point was nowhere at the beginning. In the end, the team could fight with the top of the midfield with Perez. Again, as we said though, I won't say they were nowhere at the beginning. Again, at the beginning of the season, they were there, but then they fell off because of lack of upgrades and then came back once they brought the B-Spec car back. But if they can be a lot more there during the season, then I think Racing Point, they can get a top 5 constructors position for sure. Find some other comments here. Crystal Racing, Kvyat had an okay season, got outpaced by Gasly since Singapore. Russell unfortunately couldn't really show his talent thanks to that awful Williams. You know what? Quickly, we'll give our opinions on Russell because I think he does deserve a shout out. He's obliterated Robert Kubica this season, which is not necessarily a surprise because I didn't think Kubica would beat Russell anyway. I mean, he did in the Drivers' Championship, but we know what the reason for that is. But Russell, I think, has had a very good season, and there's been a couple races where he's actually pace-wise been at an incredible level. I mean, the Hungarian Grand Prix again, that weekend from him was one of the most underrated performances of the season, and one of the best performances of any driver this season, to be actually racing in the midfield when his teammate was nowhere near. So, yeah, great season for Russell in terms of speed. He just needs a bit more luck in terms of the car he's driving, and then he could maybe show, how good he can be in that car. Let's find some others here. Still don't understand why Grosjean is driving in 2020. Says Seki Hybrid. Find some others here. Crystal Racing Albon. Let me find that. It's just gone up a bit. Albon is already performing at his maximum, but he's clearly half a second slower than Max. Gasly was very good at Silverstone, but only because he followed Max's setup. I think Albon, again, as I said during the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix weekend, I'm not asking him to beat Max Verstappen, just be, about 2.5, 3 tenths off. If he is consistently that far off, then I think Albon can get some good results, because Verstappen, next season is going to, of course, win races, and the Red Bull car should be better. So he just needs to get more used to the team and get more used to how the car is and what the car requires from the driver. Right, let's find some other ones here if I can. Perez is going to have to pray for a Brawn 2021 type situation. Seki Hybrid. Also, what's funny? Perez is actually a paid driver, but yet we never rate Perez as a paid driver. Well, that's the thing. I'm not necessarily against pay drivers. I'm against the drivers who pay to get in the car, even though they're no good. That's the problem. Drivers like Perez, they're fine because they're actually good enough. And, you have to have a financial package if you're going to race in motorsport. But, yeah, Perez is, I think, the good paid driver sort. But I don't have a problem with paid drivers. It's just as long as you can be good or competent within whatever series you're in. Crystal Racing Alpha followed Ferrari's dumb concept. Yeah, it is. That is true. Alpha have the same front wing design and didn't really work out, did it? Right. I think now we'll get on to the ratings out of 10 and what you guys think of the season. By the way, this picture of the Haas basically sums up their season, doesn't it? Kevin Magnussen in the gravel. The US Grand Prix, I think that was. Right. Let's find start of this. So, Crystal Racing says best driver, Max Verstappen, and gives the season a 6.5 out of 10. Reza says best driver, Lewis Hamilton. Best race is Hockenheim. Tonka agrees with Nib, 8 out of 10. And Crystal Racing says best race, Hockenheim, easily. Let's find some others here if I can. Mostly an F1 fan says the best races for him this season: Germany, Brazil, Austria, Monza, Silverstone, Spa, and Hungary. The worst: France, China, Abu Dhabi, Australia. I didn't think China was that bad. I think the reason people thought it was so bad is because it was the 1000th Grand Prix and the expectations were basically through the roof. If you actually go back and look at the race, it was nowhere near as bad as people want to make out. It was actually was it a great race? No, but it had good moments in it. You know, Albon coming through the field, Raikkonen and Perez coming through the field. Vettel and Verstappen raced each other for I think a couple laps there as well. So it wasn't that bad of a race, to be honest. Find some others here if I can. Favorite race for Francisco is Brazil. Driver Carlos Sainz. Overtake of the season, Sainz on Kvyat and Albon. In Monaco, battle of the season, Leclerc versus Verstappen. You know what? We'll add those to what we'll give our opinions on. So, overtake of the season. Oh, I don't know what I'd go for. Nib, do you have an overtake of the season in mind?
I have not a Scooby-Doo.
I'm trying to think what... Leclerc on Gasly at Silverstone is one. That overtake around the outside at turn 3 or 4, I think it was. That was an incredible overtake. Hard to think though, isn't it, of the best overtakes. There's been so many good ones. But Sainz on Kvyat and Albon in Monaco, around the outside at the top of the hill, that was great. Yeah, it's hard to think of one that absolutely stands out amongst the rest. But yeah, definitely those two I'd mention. And then what else did he say? Battle of the season, Leclerc versus Max at Silverstone. Has to be, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
Has to be. That battle was mental. Me and you were screaming in disbelief that it was still going on for so long. It was literally 15 laps long, wheel to wheel, every single lap. It was the best battle I've seen in a long time. And hopefully those two get in a similar enough car, because I cannot wait to see that even more in... What do you call it, in 2020 or beyond. Right, let's find some other ones here if I can. Mostly an F1 fan, now the 2010s are over. What do you make of the decade as a whole? How does it compare to previous ones? We're actually going to do a podcast on that in a couple weeks' time, so we'll answer that in a couple weeks. Right, let's find some final ones here if I can. Francisco says 9 out of 10 for the season. That's a very high rating, but there you go. And Sainz on Perez in Brazil, says mostly an F1 fan. That was a good move, I remember that. And Hamilton on Vettel in Bahrain, that was also a very good one. Kimi versus both Toro Rossos at Bahrain for Crystal Racing. I know what you mean, but it wasn't that good. But it was a very, I don't know, it was kind of a funny overtake. How he just, I think it was going into that hairpin in the middle of the track. He did a switchback and he got past both of them at once. It was quite a funny overtake, to be honest. Underrated race of the season from Mr. Random Guy. Most underrated race. I'm just trying to think of what races. You know what? I'm going to say Monaco. I thought Monaco was great. The battle between Hamilton and Verstappen. The midfield battle also was very good. But yeah, I thought Monaco was a very good race. But I think, you know, as there's plenty of people out there that were disappointed there was no wheel-to-wheel action, or not enough wheel-to-wheel action between Hamilton and Verstappen. But the battle between Lewis and Max for, 60-plus laps, I thought was great. It was gripping action, and I personally enjoyed it a lot. Nib, what would you go for most underrated of the season?
Once again, I don't know. I really don't know. It's not something that I thought about. Like I think the other questions that you asked were pretty easy, pretty comfortable to answer. But no, I have no idea in terms of say like underrated Grand Prix of the year.
It is a difficult one because, again, it's one you don't think about. But yeah, Monaco. I thought Canada was very good, but it was overshadowed by the 5-second penalty. Bar was very good, but was overshadowed by the accident the day before. And I thought also the US Grand Prix was pretty good, but I thought that was a bit underrated on social media as well. But yeah, I thought Monaco was probably the most underrated. Great race, great battle between two, well, titans at the moment in Formula One. Right, let's find a couple final ones, and then we'll get to the championship tables and the end of the stream. And Seki saying the picture of Verstappen versus Hamilton in Monaco was the picture of the year. Well, you know what? Now that you say it, I'm going to try... Yeah, I'm going to try and get it up because it is an amazing picture. And the person that took it deserves a massive award for it because it is so brilliantly timed. Let me try and find it a moment. And see if I've got it. Should have it. I had it on earlier in the stream. There you go. Here we go. What a picture that is. I think that was the second to last lap. And Verstappen had a 5-second penalty, sent it, and Hamilton just about hung on. Very lucky there was not massive contact. Could have been a Grosjean Ricciardo. If you remember that in the chicane where Grosjean went over the top of Ricciardo. I'm sure you do. Very lucky, didn't result in a big crash. But yeah, they just about got away with it. But that is one of the best pictures I think I've ever seen in Formula One. What an image that is. But let's read out a final comment. And then we'll get to the final championship tables. Underrated driver of the season, Sergio Perez. Francisco thinks the most overrated is Lando Norris. I'm not sure Lando would be the most overrated. I think the most overrated would have to be... I'm not sure, actually. I don't think there's that many people are overrating anyone in the field. I think underrated, though, yeah, Sergio Perez has got to be up there. He's had a very good season, but no one's talked about him. Overrated Albon, says Crystal Racing. Yeah, possibly, but again, nothing stands out in that area. And one final one here if I can. Reza says 8 out of 10 for 2019. Overtake of the season was that triple overtake going into Les Combes at Spa. Don't remember the drivers though. I don't remember the drivers though as well, and I think I remember the move, but I don't remember the drivers. I think maybe Pierre Gasly was involved. Can't remember though. Anyway, let's now get on to the final championship table. So here is the Drivers' World Championship. So Lewis Hamilton is your 2019 World Champion with 413 points. Valtteri Bottas second on 326. Max Verstappen third, 278. About 14 clear of Leclerc. Vettel fifth. Carlos Sainz gets sixth. That just shows you how great a season it's been. Gasly P7, Albon P8, Ricciardo P9, Perez P10. And then the bottom 10, Norris in P11, Raikkonen P12, Kvyat 13th, Hülkenberg 14th, which I've got to be honest, very surprising that Hülkenberg ended up 14th. His season, to me, seems to be a lot better than 14th in the Drivers' Championship, but there you go. 15th is Stroll, 16th Magnussen, 17th Antonio Giovinazzi, 18th Grosjean, 19th Kubica, and 20th Russell. And then, can't believe Kubica still got that point. In the Constructors, Mercedes World Champions by 235 points to Ferrari. That is a gigantic gap. And then you have Ferrari second, Red Bull third. Red Bull again could have got second if they had a proper driver alongside Max Verstappen. McLaren fourth, clearly ahead of Renault in fifth. Toro Rosso just about missing out. Racing Point seventh, and you can see there Racing Point 18 points away from Renault. And again, if between the Spanish and German Grand Prix they had a good car, they could have made that up in that time. And then Alfa 8th, Haas 9th, and then Williams P10 and bottom. Now, before I go, I just want to mention our predictions at the start of the season. Now, I couldn't get the full predictions from you, because I tried to find it earlier on. I couldn't quite find it, but I did find mine. So what I went with in the drivers for the top 5, and this was after testing, by the way. This is not the ones we did a year ago. This is the ones after testing. I went with Lewis Hamilton to win the Drivers' Championship, which I got right. And then it was Leclerc 2nd, Vettel 3rd, Verstappen 4th, Bottas 5th, and then Pierre Gasly in P6. And then in the Constructors, I went Ferrari to win the Constructors, with Mercedes 2nd and Red Bull 3rd. And then I went Renault 4th and Alfa Romeo 5th in the Constructors. Now, again, I had some trouble finding yours, Nib, but...
I'm laughing because I remember who I put first.
Sebastian Vettel, wasn't it? As
yeah,
drivers, Nib went for Sebastian Vettel as the person who would win the Drivers' Championship from Hamilton 2nd, Leclerc 3rd, I think it was.
I think so.
Yeah, and then in the Constructors, I think you went with Ferrari as well from Mercedes and Red Bull. So there you go. That's what we thought would happen, and we were, I wouldn't say massively wrong, but definitely in the Constructors we were quite a bit wrong, especially in the top 5.
I was massively wrong. I'm happy to say that.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised you still went with Vettel for 2019, but there you go. We thought
remember, I was still defending my prediction as well after a couple of races. And then I realised, Hamilton's winning.
Yeah. We have to admit, though, coming into the season after testing, all the talk was Ferrari. So that's why we went with them Constructors to win. But yeah, we did get it quite a bit wrong on the Constructors, and the Drivers more so correct, but there you go. But guys, that is it for this live podcast reviewing the 2019 Formula 1 season. And as I'll get onto in a moment, I do have some more stuff to review from this season, so don't worry, that's not it for content for 2019. But Nib, thanks for coming on, mate, and reviewing the season. And next week, we'll be doing our early 2020 predictions, so maybe you'll get the Drivers' Championship right this time.
Oh God! Well, I certainly know who I'll be predicting this time. I won't be I won't be so silly, or I should say ambitious in my prediction. But it's been fantastic to be on the podcast. Nearly 2 hours we've been going, and it's been a great little review of 2019. Was been ultimately a very good Formula One season. But yeah, thanks once again for allowing me to be on for what is now the 54th podcast. It's flying past all of this. We started nearly a year and a half ago now, pretty much. So it's been going quite a while. And as ever, we appreciate everyone's support in the chat who always shows up. And yeah, we all hope you have a very good week. And we'll see you. We'll see you whenever we see you for our next live podcast. What was it, next week? You said next week, didn't you?
Yeah, next Tuesday, same time it should be. And
there you go.
Yeah, we'll see you next week. And let's now, before I just end the stream and get onto plugging my social media, just want to let you guys know again the schedule coming up on the channel during December. So my next video should be out on Friday. That's not a guarantee. I will aim for this video coming out on Friday. It's going to be part 1 of my season review for Ferrari, where I'll go into super detail about how bad this season has been. Part 2 should be out on Monday. And then, as we said, next Tuesday, live, 7 p.m. UK time it should be, we will be doing our early 2020 predictions and, what we think is going to happen for next season based on just the way things are going, I guess, in Formula 1 and who we think will improve next season. And then a few days after that, probably before the end of next week, I'll upload a video about Max Verstappen, and I will illustrate whether he has or has not been the best driver of 2019. I'm not sure yet if he has been or not. I haven't given it enough thought, but I will be making that video at the end of next week. So that's the content coming up, guys, in the next couple of weeks. Make sure to subscribe for that. Bottom right of the screen, you can do it right there. And also go to my homepage, you can do it there. And hit the notifications bell for more content like this. Hit the like button for more content like this as well. And comment down below what you thought of this video. And comment down below what you thought of the certain teams and drivers 2019. And what you thought of 2019 as a whole. And as well, don't forget to join our Discord server, link below in the description. That's the best place for notifications of my videos and streams. And we have about 450 people almost in that server. So if you want to join that community, that ever-growing community, make sure to do so. Follow me on Twitter at Chaz6110. Like my Facebook page, that's ChazzaHDF1 on Facebook. And also, check out my website, ChazzaHD.com, for more content like this. But guys, until next Tuesday, we'll be live for another podcast episode, kind of getting into 2020. And until my next video on Friday, reviewing Ferrari's awful 2019, it has been me, ChazzaHD. Goodbye.